Let's just get started. Today we are going to discuss all the different aspects that go into financial aid. We're going to talk about the cost of attendance, which outlines how much you can borrow in loans and what your expected expenses might be at UCD. Exchange rates, which are a large factor to consider when using your US loans abroad. How the loan disbursements work when you finally will be getting your funds in September and May. And finally, the question that I'm sure is on many of your minds, how to apply for US financial aid at UCD. So if we do have parents in the audience, you might have gone through a very similar process with maybe some of your older children. I will say the process is pretty similar in applying for financial aid at a domestic school versus an international school like UCD. However, there are key differences to keep in mind, and I will be highlighting these tonight. Great. So what is federal student aid? We've already talked about federal student aid, US financial aid, student loans, and there's all these different buzzwords kind of floating around. It's easy to get confused. These are all kind of umbrella terms. So I really want to outline exactly what aid you can use at UCD. So at UCD, and really any university outside the US that is able to use student loans, you have to be accredited by the US Department of Education, and UCD is. But these students generally use the following types of US financial aid. So there are subsidized loans for undergraduate students. There are unsubsidized loans for graduate and undergraduate, and Parent Plus or Graduate Plus loans. Depending on your level, undergrad or graduate, you will be able to take these out. So the difference between these is that subsidized loans are available for undergraduate students who demonstrate financial need. Now, this is what you're really calculating when you're submitting your FAFSA. This is what they're determining if you are eligible for subsidized loans, and if so, for how much. With a subsidized loan, the US Department of Education pays the interest while the student is in school, and then for the first 6 months after graduating. So this is, if you are eligible for a subsidized loan, this is a great one to take because you're not accruing interest while you are in school. So the overall amount that you'll owe at the end is a little bit lower. Unsubsidized loans are also available for undergraduate students, but these ones are also available for graduate students, regardless of financial need. The student is responsible for paying the interest on this type of loan right away. So if you choose not to pay the interest while you are in school, trust me, I went through school with US financial loans. I know that's not always possible to pay the interest while you're going through school. That's okay, but your interest will accumulate while you are in school, even before you graduate. And this will be added onto the principal amount owed at the end of once you graduate and you actually start paying these back. Now, Direct Plus loans are for eligible parents or graduate students, depending if they're Parent Plus or Graduate Plus respectively. And these are generally borrowed after the student has maximized the amount of subsidized and unsubsidized loans that they can take. These are federal loans, so just like the aforementioned loan types, the US Department of Education is your lender when you take out a plus loan. The reason I always recommend taking out subsidized and unsubsidized first, if you can, is because the interest rate tends to be a little bit higher on plus loans than it is for these first two types. Now, the maximum plus loan amount that a student can receive is the cost of attendance, which we'll go over in a little bit, minus any other financial aid received, such as scholarships or alternate loans. Now, for a Parent Plus loan, this is a loan that is being taken out by the parent on behalf of the student, whereas subsidized and unsubsidized are being taken out by the student. The Parent Plus loan is being taken out by the parent. And so it's kind of hard. The parent or graduate student should not have an adverse credit history when they take these out. And so the US Department of Education does conduct a credit check when you apply for this loan. If you do have an adverse credit history, you might still be eligible for a plus loan, but there will be additional requirements. And so I recommend that you reach out to the federal aid office. Great. Now, these are the annual loan limits for each of your direct loans that I just talked about. As you can see, the subsidized loan limits increase each year. As I mentioned, the plus loans do have a higher interest rate, so it is better to take out these subsidized and unsubsidized up to the max before you jump into the Parent Plus or, where relevant, the Graduate Plus loans. Now, as you can see here, there are different limits for dependent or independent students. You can see your dependency status on your student aid report once you complete the FAFSA. Now, once you submit your FAFSA, the U.S. Department of Education does generate a report based on your answers, based on your tax information, and it sends you this report. And on here, you can see what your dependency status is according to the U.S. government. Most undergraduate students are dependent students. This does not mean that their parents are helping them pay for college. It doesn't even mean necessarily that their parents can help them pay for college. It just means that they are in a situation where there is a parent and adult in their life that might be able to take out a loan for them. Now, as I said, most undergraduate students are dependent students, except in cases of family estrangement, homelessness, and other unique cases. A student would still be a dependent student even if their parent was denied for a parent plus loan. That does not move them into an independent student status. But if you have any questions about this, please let us know, because UCD can make a one-time change of a dependent student to an independent student, but we cannot reverse this change. So if you really think that your dependency status should be different than what is listed on your student aid report upon submitting the FAFSA, please reach out to the Federal Aid Office to discuss your options. Now, if you are a graduate student, great. You are an independent student no matter what. All graduate students are considered independent, regardless of if your parents are helping to pay for your college. Now, if you are a graduate student, your unsubsidized loan limits will be $20,500 for each year of your degree. So for the undergraduate students, the loan limits kind of increase for subsidized. But for graduate students, you can see this is the same amount each year if you are on a graduate degree program of greater than 1 year. I know most of our graduate degree programs are only 1 year. Now, if you are a graduate student who has previously taken out loans, you may want to check your lifetime loan limits to make sure that you are not reaching your maximum loan allowance. Now, this will be on that student aid report that the FAFSA generates for you. So you can just check down to one of the last pages and it will tell you how close you are to reaching that maximum loan limit. If we see that you are close to reaching that limit, we might deny your application or we might reach out to you with alternate options. Great. So you've heard me discuss this cost of attendance a few times tonight. And the cost of attendance, or COA letter, is a very important document that outlines how much a student can reasonably expect to need to borrow while completing a year of their studies. Now, this COA includes tuition, room and board, travel, personal expenses, healthcare, etc. A student can borrow their federal loans up to the total cost of attendance. So this is basically a number that we give you saying this is the maximum amount of loans that you can take out. Now, UCD does provide an exaggerated cost of attendance, meaning that the total number on your COA is not our recommended budget for living in Dublin. As students are allowed to borrow up to this total cost of attendance, we really like to provide a greater than average estimate for living in case a student does need to increase their loans. Now, this was very helpful this past year. As we saw, this was an incredibly unusual case of inflation that affected people around the world. So we had students living in Dublin that ended up needing to increase their loan requests up to the total cost of attendance because they just weren't anticipating the price of groceries and everything to rise in the second semester. Now, you will receive a COA after you submit your FAFSA if you use UCD's school code. Now, I included that in the PowerPoint, and I will be sending on these slides next week, so you will receive it then. But the federal aid team here at UCD creates a personalized cost of attendance based on your tuition, your scholarship amounts, and your personal student aid report. So this is a completely individualized letter that will help you understand how much you can borrow. You will receive this starting in April if you've already submitted your FAFSA. If you submit your FAFSA after that, don't worry, there's still time. Then you will receive it normally within 3 to 4 weeks of submitting your FAFSA. If you've already submitted your FAFSA, but you just didn't use UCD school code, no problem. You can just log into the website and add us on there. That way we can be sure to receive your information. Wonderful. So as mentioned, this COA is an exaggerated cost of living in Dublin, but we really highly recommend that you discuss with your families a realistic budget for a year at UCD. So these are the amounts that we will put on this letter that says, this is how much, this is the maximum amount that you can borrow to live in Dublin. And here are just an idea of where we're getting these numbers. So a great site that I would recommend is Numbeo. Now, this site allows for you to see real prices for everyday things such as rent, groceries, transportation, and to compare them with your current city. I know that when I was budgeting to live in Dublin, it was really helpful to see how much I would be spending on these everyday things compared to my Chicago-based budget. So I can actually compare the cities and see how much my budget would differentiate. Now, the COA does include an estimate of weekly and monthly costs, as you can see in this top right chart, but also one-off expenses such as flights, immigration fees, and health insurance, because these are actually amounts that you do need to budget for if you are a US citizen who will have to apply for a residency permit when you arrive. That's a 300 euro fee every year, but you can include that in your student loan request because the government understands that this is a cost that you will have to pay no matter what. So the COA will be higher for those 3-semester programs, such as graduate students, as they will have to budget to live in Dublin for an entire year instead of just 9 months as undergraduate students do. Yeah. So we calculate your COA by taking your tuition and program fees as listed on your offer letter, adding in the estimated living expenses and essential costs as shown in the last slide, and then subtracting any scholarships or outside financial aid. If you are receiving a scholarship from UCD, then we will automatically include this in your COA because we see it on your offer letter. We understand that you have won 4,000 euro. You know, it's very exciting. If you are receiving a scholarship from another organization, any outside UCD, you must let us know that when you submit your application so that we can include it in your COA. So the earlier, the better. Failure to do so can be seen as fraudulent by the US Department of Education, and you might have to return part of your student loans, sometimes at a loss, depending on what the exchange rate is, or if you're losing origination fees after that. So it's not a good idea to try to hide any scholarships that you might have received. So just let us know as soon as you receive them so that we can help give you an accurate cost of attendance. One very important aspect to note is that your COA will be listed in dollars, but you see that your tuition and your scholarships from UCD are listed in euro. Well, we list the COA in dollars because the actual money that you are borrowing from the US government and the actual money that you will have to pay back is in dollars. So that's why the COA is listed in dollars. So the COA does include this blank amount that so that you know the exact amount in dollars that you will need to spend. It also includes the origination fee, which is attached to every loan, whether you take it at an international school or a domestic school. I often get students asking if we can waive this fee. I will say UCD does not see any portion of this amount. This is a fee that goes directly to the US Department of Education. So if we could, we would, but unfortunately, all students have to pay this as part of their loan agreement. Wonderful. So as I mentioned, the COA does use a hypothetical exchange rate. This is kind of a worst case scenario, a buffer, if you will, to just in case the exchange rate fluctuates while the student's already in Dublin, their COA is protected with that greater maximum loan amount. Now, right now we are calculating the COA at $1.30 for every euro. But the exchange rate is actually much more favorable for Americans right now. It's actually $1.09 for every euro. So we do have a 21-cent buffer in case the exchange rate tips much more heavily in Europe's favor. Then we can still increase your loans so that you can afford your rent, afford to keep paying for all these fun things that you planned in Dublin. Sorry, oh great, we got a question. So the actual euros that you do receive on the day of disbursement will depend on the real exchange rate that day, not this hypothetical exchange rate. This hypothetical exchange rate is only used to calculate your COA letter. But when you actually receive these loans, it will be calculated in the $9 amount or whatever it is in September. So the total amount that you request will be listed in dollars, as I mentioned, with 50% of this total dollar amount distributed in September and 50% distributed in January. if you're a 2-semester undergraduate student. If you're a 3-semester graduate student, then you will see a third in September, a third in January, and a third in May. Now, this might get a little confusing, so I've included a sample disbursement just so that you can kind of see it. If you look at the disbursement amount for September and January in dollars, you can see that it's the same amount of dollars dispersed each semester at 50% of the total requested for September and January. However, because the difference in exchange rates for September and January, the student did receive a slightly different euro amount in their account each semester. So it's a little bit unknown because you are kind of waiting to see what the exchange rate will be on the day that we draw down your disbursement. One moment. Now, legally, we must distribute loans in the following order. And this would be for a 2-semester program. We would have to pay 50% of your tuition out of that 50% disbursement. Then, if you did borrow more than the cost of tuition, there might be funds remaining. Of the remaining funds, we must pay accommodation fees if you are living on campus. Sometimes students do request that we give them the money right away and then they can go and pay their accommodation fees. Unfortunately, legally, we must pay tuition, then accommodation fees. Then if there are any funds remaining after that, if you did request more money, then we can refund the remaining amount to the student's Irish bank account. Now, students can open an Irish bank account in person on campus in September. They will then upload their bank details to SysWeb to ensure that they receive their refund in a timely manner. And we will be sending students really detailed instructions on how to do this over the summer months. Additionally, there will be a group during orientation that goes with them and explains how to open up this Irish bank account in person in September. So you're not on your own here. Great. So I'm sure the question, many of you came here to find out how to actually apply for financial aid. Now, the U.S. financial aid application will open on SysWeb in April. So if you haven't already done so, please submit your FAFSA on studentaid.gov. Once you submit your FAFSA using UCD school code, we will receive your student aid report. Using the student aid report, the federal aid team will send you a personalized cost of attendance letter. With this letter, you will complete the U.S. financial aid application on SysWeb. Now, this application includes the student signing master promissory notes, an entrance counseling form, and an annual student loan acknowledgement form. All of these documents can be found at studentaid.gov, and students will receive more information about this in the federal aid brochure. And so there's definitely a step-by-step guide on how to do this. You are not alone in this aspect either. Now, the deadline to submit the U.S. financial aid application on SysWeb is July 31st, 2022. So you have a few months to get this in. I always think the earlier the better, just so that you can kind of sit back, rest easy, know that you submitted all of your documents already. Now, after all of the documents are submitted, we will begin reviewing these applications in August. So in August, our team will review all loan applications, and then we will reach out to students with corrections. So if you make a mistake in your financial aid application on SysWeb, that's okay. There's not going to be an automatic rejection. Instead, we'll reach out to you, ask you to correct something, and then we'll come back and certify your application after you have fixed that. We will then send award letters to the students confirming their loan amounts and disbursement dates. Now, the first loan disbursement will be September 5th. So within a couple days after that, the student can expect the refund to their Irish bank account, assuming that they upload their details before that date. Great. So I see we're getting a little bit towards the end, and I want to make sure we have time for questions. So I'm just going to zip through this real quick. The U.S. financial aid is not the only source of funding outside of self-funding for U.S. students. UCD does also accept the GI Bill and veterans benefits for most programs. If you are interested in using military benefits at UCD, please reach out to the Federal Aid Office to discuss your options. UCD does accept 529 savings plans. It is up to the student, however, to contact their provider to make sure that these funds can be used internationally. Many plans are able to be used internationally, but it's always good just to double check. Now, students can also use private loans at UCD. UCD does not recommend a specific provider, but we have had students use providers such as Sally Mae or Ernest Navient in the past. I do recommend maximizing your federal loan eligibility before you request private loans if possible, because the interest rates tend to be much lower for federal loans rather than private loans. Great. So this is all of our contact information. This federal aid email, federalaid@ucd.ie, is a great resource to have. Definitely reach out to them with any questions that you might have, especially regarding your financial aid package or any questions on applying. You can reach the North America Global Center at northamerica@ucd.ie. And below is my personal contact. So please reach out to me if you have any questions as well.